Welcome back to the Healthy Seas podcast. Today we're diving deep, quite literally, into one of the most unique scientific projects we've ever undertaken. In partnership with DWS, a global investment firm, Healthy Seas is studying the impact of ghost nets on the biodiversity of shipwreck ecosystems in Greece. It's the first time our foundation is leading a long-term scientific investigation alongside our cleanup missions, and we're lucky to be joined by two of the brilliant women behind it, marine scientists Isadora Abuter and Ramona Reichert, who took part in the expedition and are helping translate underwater observations into real ecological insight. From ghost nets to groupers, from shipwrecks to sampling tools, let's find out what this project was about. Hi, Isadora and Ramona. It's so great to have you here with me today.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So can you tell us briefly what this project is about? What made it different from previous Healthy Seas missions?
Usually when we have a mission, it focuses solely on cleanups under the surface or above the surface along the coastline, or education or prevention. Sometimes we bring all those three pillars together, but this project really brought in a new aspect, which is the scientific background. Here we really studied how marine life responds to ghost nets and what happens when they are removed. We focused on a shipwreck and the marine ecosystem that has developed around it, and we were researching this impact of the ghost net that was entangled on the wreck. And so what we looked at was how the removal of this ghost net potentially impacts the colonization of marine organisms. So what does that mean? It means what happens when we take the ghost net away. Are organisms coming back? Is their growth changing once the net is removed? And part of this project is also to determine the microplastics pollution coming from the ghost nets.
So this was the first phase of studying what it looked like while the net was there. And then later on, it's to look like what happens afterwards, right?
Yes. So in this first phase that we've already conducted, we did a survey on the net and on the net-free zone, so on the wreck itself, to compare this. Then later on, we removed a part of the net that was hanging in the water column, so potentially still capturing animals, while we left one part of the net that was really well covered in growth and close to the wreck where we didn't see immediate danger to marine life. And now we're going to go back soon to see what happened now underneath this removed area of the net. And that's what we will do in the future, and then compare how this removal has impacted that specific area compared to the other two sites.
Very interesting. And why was this particular shipwreck in Greece chosen as a study site? What makes it special, either biologically or ecologically?
So first, logistics are a big consideration, especially with underwater research, because the deeper you go, the more complex the diving gets and the least time you have underwater actually. So you need to take into consideration these logistical challenges of diving, and we chose the Zakynthos wreck, which lies at 44 meters and is a good way not to go too deep, but still have interesting site to study. And then of course, we choose a site that is ecologically significant. Here we chose the Ionian Sea, which is a year-round migration route for different animals, and you can find different megafauna like dolphins residing there. So it's really ecological, interesting area. And also another consideration, which is more like a practical consideration, is that we have Mako, our boat, stationed in Greece. And of course, for underwater research, you need a boat that is comfortable and big enough, especially to do scientific work and to handle all the equipment that you need, which is quite a lot of equipment and kind of big equipment. We will talk later about it. So it was very comfortable to have Mako close by. So in summary, these are really the key points why to choose a specific study site.
And total side question, but do you guys know the history of this ship?
Yes, so it was carrying cars and such things, but then the weather turned and there were big waves, and the cargo was arranged in such a way that it was not very good because the waves pushed the ship to one side, and then the cargo fell kind of on this side, and then that's why it sank. And then at some point there was an explosion and more explosions, and that's how it sank. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay. Yeah, just out of curiosity. What were your impressions when you first saw the site? Can you describe what it looked like, both in terms of biodiversity and pollution?
When we went there, it was very different than to other dives that I'm used to, because usually I go diving from the beach side, so it's a shore dive, or you descend from a boat where you already see the bottom. But here we really had to go down into the blue along the mooring line, which was super special for me because you don't see the wreck at first, and then slowly it starts to appear beneath you in the deep blue. And that's just such a fascinating moment because it makes you think about the story of the wreck. It makes you think about the story of the people that were on there. And yeah, that's just such a moment of gratitude also to be able to experience this. And when we got closer, we saw the schools of fish that were around there. We saw this almost magical fairy tale forest of algae growing on top of the wreck. And as we got closer, we saw that the net is hanging on the side of the wreck down towards the bottom. And upon closer inspection, we could see that it was really full of life. We saw bryozoans, we saw sponges growing, coral that hadn't only colonized the wreck, but also was growing on the net, which is just an indication of how long this net has been down there already. And yeah, that was really fascinating. And we also had a special visitor in two of our dives, which is a greater amberjack. It's a big fish that's a predator feeding on smaller fish, and its presence around the wreck just shows us that there is a lively ecosystem that's thriving in this artificial reef situation that this wreck has created over the years.
I'm surprised to hear that the wreck was so alive.
Yeah, so what the wreck does is that it adds a structure on a very flat bottom. It adds a vertical structure. And it's a super big wreck, to be very honest. And the net that we looked at has a good size. It's not small, but compared to the size of the wreck, it is really small. So this vertical structure that's providing shelter, a protection from currents, also protection from predators, like this greater amberjack. It can't go inside. The openings are too small. But you have the smaller fish that in the night they can hide in the crevices, and they wouldn't have that in the open water column. So it really attracts fish to come in from all sides and provides them a breeding ground, so they have something to attach their eggs to care for the young. It helps them to shelter, as said, from predators as well as currents and challenging weather conditions. And for bigger predators, then it also provides a food source. So that's why wrecks are so incredibly valuable, because they add an additional living space in the vastness of the ocean.
Let's talk about the scientific side. What exactly did you measure during this first phase of the project, and why?
Yeah, so we actually measured different things. Firstly, we measured the microplastic contamination because nets are often made of nylon, and in this case, it was also a nylon net. And with the time, with the waves, with the sunlight, it really gets degraded into microplastic. So we wanted to see if there is also a microplastic contamination from the net. But then when it comes to the net itself, we measured the dimensions to estimate how much potential habitat there is being blocked currently by the net. We also looked at what is growing on the net. So we identified and documented the species that are colonizing the net itself, because the net actually itself can also serve as an artificial habitat, right? So that's why we also looked on what is growing on the net. And then we also looked on the wreck and what is growing on the wreck to compare the biodiversity between what is growing on the net and what is growing on the wreck. And then we removed the net or a part of the net and we checked what is actually growing under the net to assess if the presence of the net has somehow an influence on marine organisms that are settling under the net. So these were some observations that we did to make afterwards a comparative analysis between what is growing on the net, what is growing under the net, and what is growing on the wreck itself.
What are the findings from this first part of the study?
Yeah, so what we found on Zakynthos really surprised us. We always knew that ghost nets were harmful, right? But the difference between life on the nets and life on the wreck was much bigger than we actually expected. So on the parts of the wreck without the net, there was a thriving community. And on the nets, the life was much poorer. So the nets act almost like heavy curtains, blocking sunlight and slowing the water flow and covering up the surfaces underneath them. So even if you see some organisms growing on the net, it's not the same as the richness and the diversity we saw on the wreck itself. And one of the most clearest examples I would like to give here was corals. So we found a solitary coral species that was taller and more abundant on the wreck. And on the net, the coral was smaller, and in the areas we had just cleared from the net, there were no corals that were settled yet. So this shows that the ghost nets don't just trap and kill marine life, but really they also reduce the biodiversity and make it harder for long-lived species like these corals to establish themselves. So in short, ghost nets cover the wreck and change the conditions that allow marine life to flourish. And the next big question that we have here is, once the net is removed, how long does it really take for life to come back? And that's what we'll keep investigating. And then the question is what is growing on the net super valuable, or is it like species that would grow anyways on the wreck, so we take it out, or is it are there growing species that we don't see much and are super important? So this is somehow a question that every time you dive, you need to assess before taking the net out, obviously.
Sometimes removing a net isn't possible or even the best option, particularly when marine life has already established itself on it. For your scientific project, what tools or protocols did you use underwater to conduct this kind of work?
So for an underwater research, you need some tools. And in this case, the main tool that we used was a photoquadrat or photoquadrant. I call it photoquadrat because it's basically a quadrat where you can mount a camera on. And you do that to have the same frame of what is growing on the wreck or on the net or on the seafloor over and over again, and have the same dimension, and later be able to deduct what size, for example, the organisms have. So it's a reliable way that is replicable, and it's very useful, and it's called photoquadrat. But then also we used a macro camera to take close-ups, because you can imagine that if we have 50 times 50 photo quadrat, that the camera was a bit further away. So if we have really tiny organisms, it's easier to identify if we have some macro shots of them. So that's why we also took macro shots with the macro camera. And then another tool that we used were sampling tubes to take microplastic samples from the water column, but also from the seafloor, from the sediment, to understand what's happening there with the microplastic contamination.
Okay. And how do you balance scientific rigor with the logistical challenges of diving in sometimes difficult conditions? Like who else was in the team to help you?
So in total, we were a team of 6 divers, and really it all needs a good plan of the dives. And it comes back to a very basic principle that you learn early in your diving education. It's plan your dive and dive your plan. We really needed good preparation, thorough dive planning, including the distribution of scientific tasks among team members, as well as the logistical factors like gas consumption and dive length. And the really, really wonderful thing was that as part of the team, we had technical divers from ghost diving who were able to take over some tasks, like laying down the transects, measuring the net, focusing on the ghost net removal later on. And this teamwork really made it possible to have this scientific outcome while staying safe underwater and on the surface. So it was amazing to have this multi-skilled team to complete the various tasks of the project. And as said, everyone was absolutely necessary to be able to do this safely. And I'm just so really happy that we were able to work this well together as a team.
What will the second phase of this project focus on?
We're going to be going back to the exact same location, the same wreck that we've already described, and we will focus on assessing what has grown on the newly net-free zone of the wreck, and to be able to assess how the marine life grows after net removal.
One unique aspect of this project is the collaboration with an illustrator who helped to visualize the wreck and its ecosystem. Why do you think this visual, almost poetic approach matters in science communication?
Yeah, so we are super, super excited to work together with an illustrator to bring this project to life and to a broader audience. I believe science communication is really super, super crucial, because even the most important research really doesn't have an impact if people cannot understand it. So this collaboration with the illustrator allows us to bring the wreck and the ecosystem to life in a visual, and as you say, almost in a poetic way. And as such, we work with illustrations because illustrations make science more approachable and easier to understand for a broader audience. And they help to open up and broaden up a topic, making it more accessible. And yeah, also illustrations can show complex relationships in an easier way. And as the saying goes, what you don't understand, you will not protect. So our aim is to make people really understand and aware of the topic, to make future stewards or to make conservationists out of them.
I think that's a very effective strategy. Now, in your opinion, how can we make scientific work on marine biodiversity more accessible and engaging for people outside of the research world?
What we're trying to focus on is to make it understandable, to bring in visuals like photos and videos, and easier to understand language, not to throw around those fancy words that are very abstract almost for the everyday person. But we're trying to make it approachable, to make it easy to ask questions for the curious people out there, and to bring impressions with us to the surface from the underwater, to inspire people to ask the right questions, to educate themselves about things that they are curious about, to go and dive deeper into this world. And I think that's also really part of what scientists should be doing, to not keep their research behind those walls of fancy words, but to really engage the broader public with the findings, because that's who we're trying to benefit with our research. We're trying to make the planet more livable. So I think that's really, really important. And I hope that we can also improve our ways of doing this, to keep on learning how to reach out and to make it easier to grasp for everyone.
And I think Healthy Seas is really gifted at doing that and making your work accessible and relatable to people. And I am excited that you guys are now also taking this on, because I think it's just having the scientific backing for what you're doing is only going to strengthen your existing work. I can't wait to hear what comes and follow up with you guys about it. Thank you both so much for bringing us into this project and showing us that research can go hand in hand with conservation and communication. Your work reminds us that every net removed is not just cleanup, it's a chance to learn and protect and tell the ocean's stories in new ways. And to the listener, if you'd like to follow up with the second phase of this project, stay tuned and don't forget to explore the illustrations and the updates from this mission on our website and social channels. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep caring for the sea. Thanks for listening to the Healthy Seas podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, follow and share it with others who care about the ocean. Want to dive deeper? Subscribe to our newsletter at healthyseas.org/newsletter for behind-the-scenes stories, upcoming projects, and partner updates from around the world. There are many ways to be part of the mission. Donate, partner, spread the word, or simply stay connected. Explore how at healthyseas.org/take-action. Together, we can turn marine waste into waves of change.